first thing is the adoption of the agenda. Does anyone have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda is adopted. Next is the reading of the equity statement. Do I have a volunteer?
Sure.
Okay. Thank
Columbia
you.
Public Schools, through action and in partnership with families and community, will uphold the values, policies, and practices that promote cultural competence. We will accept, embrace, and empower students and staff in their individual identities to establish and sustain human dignity, justice, and equitable treatment and inclusiveness in the classroom and workplace.
All right, thank you. So the next thing is the consideration of the minutes. I know I got something from April on this, and I've got my own edits, but I've not gotten a chance to put them in writing yet. So if I can have everyone just agree, we're just gonna move that to August, and we'll approve the minutes at that point. I didn't get a chance to get my edits in.
I move that we move the approval of the
May 20th.
May 20th meeting minutes to the August meeting.
All right. Second? Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Then that passes. So the next thing is GBE, staff, health and safety.
So GBE is just an update based on, this was another one of those policies that I thought would be review no changes. I compared it with what MSBA's core language is, and that's where this update has come from. It's, so now this reflects what MSBA's core policy was, because if you notice, we had last reviewed it in 2007. So MSBA had made some changes with that since.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is on unfinished business merely because we didn't get to it last time.
Yeah, we ran out of
Not because we
time.
had any discussion.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, is there any other discussion on this one? All right, all those in,
I move that
Oh,
we
yep.
adopt policy JBE, staff health and safety, GBE, staff health and safety, as presented.
Second?
all right. Is there any further discussion? All right, in that case, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great. So the next three, I think all need to go to August. I'm looking at
So
I'm looking at
GBH,
failure to maintain boundaries, and it does not have the exceptions in it.
well, so Dr. Yearwood can talk to that, because
Okay.
he mentioned it before to me, and they've got you paper clipped here. And
Oh, is there a copy?
The last item, administration has made some notes as to, why, they're not recommending it to go into our policy. It's MSBA's core policy, and they've made notes there.
Yes. So if you look at the MSBA core manual, and there's some notes on there, and basically the exceptions to the policy are already in our CPS administrative procedures. So that's why we did not want to put them in here, because these are already in our procedures. We did put in the failure to maintain boundaries. We added that to the policy, but administration was not recommending that because we already have it in admin procedures.
So can I ask, because I feel like there's two different things. So the one is like, what are the failure to maintain boundaries? And this seems like this is the list of things that do fail to maintain boundaries. But what I also hear is that we do not have in our policy anything about exceptions. And if you read some of the things about failure to maintain boundaries, I think the concern was for teachers who have students or parents who are also teachers and maybe their kids have friends or things like that, right? Like if we have things like giving gifts to individual students, like if you have a teacher and they have a family friend or they have their own child or something like that, in theory, they are violating policy then, and failing, I can't speak, I'm sorry, to maintain the boundaries, right, if they're giving those gifts. So I think that was the concern. Like, there are things about students being in teachers' houses, but if a child has a sleepover and their parent happens to be a teacher, I think it's something that like all of us would say like logically that shouldn't apply, but at least there's no exception in here. Like, there's nothing that delineates that in the policy, and I think that was, I know Anne's not here, but her husband is a teacher in the district, and they do have 2 kids, so I mean, I think that was like, when she was looking at it, at least as I heard her articulate it, that was part of the particular concern, to not have exceptions in there as well.
And from our perspective, we wanted to have a little more openness on leverage to determine exceptions. If you put these in as exceptions, that's it. This is the letter of the law. If it's, administrative procedures, then we have the ability to even adjust as needed in situations where we see there may need to be additional exceptions without it having to come back to the board.
I'm not gonna disagree with you on that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I also don't disagree, except that the exceptions piece that's in the procedures doesn't list like specific things, like it is open and allows for that discussion, but it at least articulates in the policy that there are exceptions.
Right, and I was gonna say, and with regard to that, what you're saying is if there are no exceptions in the policy, that we can have administrative procedures that supersede policy. We need something in the policy to allow administration to have those procedures to create exceptions. Because otherwise, what we're stuck with is, we're stuck with the failure to maintain boundaries with no exception in the policy, and policies are at a lower level than, that procedures are at a lower level than the policies.
Right.
And therefore, we need something in it. I'm not suggesting that this is the language we should use. If you feel like that there is language that you would prefer so that you can do what you're saying, I would have no problem putting that in as the exceptions to allow for administration to do that through procedures. But I do think that we need something in the policy. Otherwise, what we're saying is that procedures can supersede policy, and that's just not how things work.
No. So what we're looking at is procedures are supposed to be the interpretation of the policy. And so if there is no room for interpretation of the policy, then that's where we get ourselves sort of.
This
Well-
just says that the admin will interpret it. That's what the exception says, right?
Right, the administration, and that's what we are saying, that if we are, it goes a little bit beyond just admin will interpret it, and, it talks about protecting students from harm. District does not intend to interfere with or impede appropriate interactions between staff and staff members and students. Okay. What does that mean? You have that in policy. What does that mean? And so I think that if you are going to put it in policy, we have to be very careful, because that's when we call it litigation, legal comes to the forefront. And that's why we said that these were so broad that it allows us as administrators to look at the failure to maintain boundaries. I think that is solid. But as far as other things, for example, like you're saying, if a teacher has a sleepover and during the sleepover there are gifts, we as administration, it can't just be, it says here, giving gifts to individual students. If that's the case, then we have a lot of people getting themselves in hot water with that. But if you're saying that we can have those ability to have those exceptions, we can come back and say, yeah, it's okay for a teacher to give presents of children they're having sleepovers with. If we start putting, sorry, never mind, yeah.
That is a
It's a long thing. I'm gonna stop while I'm here, yeah.
I just want to clarify, I think that is what you meant, but
Right,
just to
right.
make sure we're all on the same page.
Right, you're correct, yeah. So anyway, so that's why we have it there, but again, this is policy, so we'll follow whatever policy wants. We can adjust.
I guess the way I would interpret it is I agree with you 100% on what should happen, and I think the way that happens is by including the paragraphs about exceptions to policy in the policy. I think that allows the administration, that is what allows the administration to have leeway in not having to address just because that you hear that like someone was, somewhere. But
I agree with Paul as well, and I hadn't thought of it that way, is, policy basically trumps everything.
Yes.
And so the lack of, I guess my question, I don't know how administration decides which things they send to MSBA for questions and which things they don't, but I guess my question would be, what was MSBA's viewpoint of leaving this out of our policy and deferring to whatever the administrative procedures are? And that might not be a question that was posed, because this just came from their core policy, obviously.
I know that basically a lot of these, whether administrative or we run it by MSB because they're the legal hand of the state, and we always try to get input from them as well as our attorneys before making those adjustments and changes. But again, I'm open to a direction on.
I understand what you were saying earlier to me in our other meeting about, not having duplication.
Right.
On the other hand, the benefit that I see about this is policy is something that is publicly available and easily accessible by everyone. Whereas administrative procedures, presumably it would be a teacher or a staff member who might be trying to go find where that administrative procedure is if they needed to for whatever reason. I guess I don't see the harm in having it in both places or something in both places. Unless, of course, your administrative procedure somehow contradicts what's in the policy, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No,
You know.
no, it just allows us some flexibility in what we do, but again, I'm open, so if y'all wanna put in policy, let's put it in there,
The only other thing is that it does say at the top of page 2, in that first sentence, unless an educational purpose exists or an exception as defined in this policy applies, but we don't
list the policy, the exceptions
Right.
talk about
and
the exceptions.
so-
Right, so if we don't have the exception, then that has to, if we don't have a list of
Well, then,
exceptions,
yeah, that would,
that would have to be.
And then the policy would say, unless an educational reason exists, without exception, and then we would still have the problem of having an administrative procedure that conflicts with the policy.
That's true.
So I would recommend, my recommendation is that we take this, is that we either put in the exception as MSBA, or I think Dr. Yearwood makes a good point that he wants more flexibility. We have until August in that case, and then just put in something that says exactly what authority the administration has to make those exceptions, and I think I would be comfortable with that, at least for myself.
And what about the section of consequences? Because that is covered by administrative procedures as well.
Honestly, consequences, I'm not as worried about that as so, at least personally. Again, will of the committee here too.
Sure.
But I'm more concerned with the exceptions to policy and having what at least appears to be conflicting policy and administrative procedures.
I agree, I agree with that,
that's fine.
I would say too, on the consequences piece, that, it says staff members who violate this policy will be disciplined up to and including termination of employment. That's sort of the default for any violation of policy.
Right.
So I don't know that
there's a benefit to that.
that it matters that's in there or not, like it doesn't change anything
Right.
that is effectively happening anyway, and again, it defers to, essentially to the administrative procedures and to like the processes that like HR and everyone else has, but it's not, that's kind of what it like staff are expected to follow board policies or they can be disciplined, that's sort of the
And we're already mandatory reporters too, so that sentence
that piece
is already a foregone conclusion.
So I have a motion.
Okay.
I move that administration revisit policy GBH and provide us with a section on exceptions to this policy at the August meeting.
Second?
Okay.
All right, is there any further discussion?
I know we have a motion on the floor, so now let's get this motion, and I have a question.
About this?
Not about the motion. I want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, about this policy, but about the motion, not about the motion. Let's get the motion.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Becky, you're with
Yes, so we're doing exceptions. I'm just curious about that part on consequences and reporting. What do we do with that?
I think, I think everyone here was kind of like consequences. I mean, you guys have that in administrative procedures. I think it's also covered, just throughout just employment
Yeah.
Right.
in general, so I don't know.
Yeah, although I don't know, it's very short and I don't know that it hurts to have it in policy. It's like, if it's consistent with what's in some of our other policies and consistent with everything else that matches up, I think it could go
Yeah.
either way. And maybe that's someplace where MSBA and or Grant could weigh in terms of what is best in terms of like coverage legally and things like that. And then with whatever those recommendations are, you can come back with things in August.
And the reporting, I think, was already in our policy.
It's in a different, I believe that the mandatory reporting nature of our district is in another policy.
No, he was asking about this section on reporting underneath consequences.
Oh.
But this section on reporting underneath consequences is already in our current policy.
Oh, yeah.
There wasn't anything, changed there. So that's the same as what it has been
Okay.
since 2007.
Okay.
So consequences, just whatever Grant and MSBA and administration thinks, and then bring us something on exceptions, to put in there. I think, sounds like this committee would be open to going at whatever recommendation it is for consequences.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to the next thing, JGD and JGDR1. I think we already discussed at the last meeting that probably needs to go all the way to August. Is that still the case, Dr. Yearwood?
Yes, sir. I do have a question about JGDR1. That's a regulation that we have. And I think it's important that the board sees, or perhaps this committee is able to weigh in on regulations. But regulations sometimes do need to change based upon the current condition. So my question here is, the policy committee reviews or looks at the regulation, but I am not 100% that it has to have board approval on a regulation.
So MSBA's core policy is JGD.
Correct.
And at some point, 20 years ago, the district took out, 2 pages of it and made it JGDR1.
Right.
And so we've been talking all along of, basically taking this back to being JGD.
Okay.
Just like MSBA has it. Because everything in our policy, if you take MSBA's JGD and our JGD and JGDR1, they are all completely identical with the exception of this paragraph 5 that deals with the 3 to 10 days. Everything else is the same. And so we were just gonna put it all into one.
So, a question there. For example, we had a situation at a school where things were getting out of hand. And so we had an online protocol that was put in place. If we are saying, and I don't have a problem with JGD going back into JGD, but making sure that I do have the leverage whenever there are extreme cases, especially when it pertains to safety, to be able to move to correcting that situation.
This policy is about the appeals though, and
Right.
so I think that as MSBA has done, I think it's important that the appeals be very public and easily accessible and in policy. So I don't think that necessarily that situation is affected by this so much as what is the appeal from that decision. So
Yeah, because
so
this is about the appeal process, because I can tell you, having navigated this,
Right.
it is impossible
Okay.
for a family to understand by looking at this policy. I have 3 degrees, and when I read this policy and I can't figure out what it says,
Right.
we have to have clear, if a parent needs resources and they go and pull this up, they need to know, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3.
Right.
You know,
So
how
what I-
you make the decisions is,
Yeah, right.
Right, and I agree. I said, I have no problem with this going into JGD. I just
Yeah.
wanted to note that exception when there may be time, but again, Mr. Harper is saying shouldn't be a problem, because if
Yeah.
a condition exists at a school, I am gonna have to step in and say, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z to correct it. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But,
Yeah.
but the family would still have the option to appeal that decision. How in the process that we put here, we added a layer that
MSBA
is
doesn't
very,
have.
MSBA didn't have,
Right.
that was very confusing. And I've heard from lots of families, heard from attorneys who don't necessarily understand that paragraph 5. And so we're trying to fix that difference here. And if we want a more prescriptive 3 to 10, I don't have a problem with that. We just need to make sure that it's clear to our parents what that 3 to 10 is.
Yeah.
Because right now, MSBA's is actually more vague than what we have. So ours is confusing and theirs is just totally vague. So
Right.
if we want something prescriptive, I'm all for it. We just need to make sure that it's reasonable and that our families understand it.
Yeah,
In the policy, even though I can't tell you exactly where it is in the policy, but I've read this thing 1,000 times. In the policy, at some point, it says, if you're appealing it, basically it's stayed until the appeal, unless the superintendent says, you're too much of a danger to be on our campus while you're appealing it, right? So even if you suspend a student or put them online for 20 days and the family wants to appeal it, if you deem that it is not a safe environment for that student to come back to,
Right.
they still go through the appeal process, the kid still stays online while that's playing out.
okay.
And that is already in the policy, that was in the policy previously.
Okay,
I believe that's even in MSBA's core policy.
yes, okay.
Right,
okay.
right. Okay, so do we have a motion on J, GD, and JGD?
I move to revisit JGD and JGD R1 at the August meeting.
August, okay.
All right.
Yes, August?
Yep.
Or do we need to?
August.
Okay, great.
And if it needs to be pushed, we can
Further,
talk
we-
about it
yeah.
then, but, all right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any other discussion?
I have a question. We're moving it, but what are we doing in the meantime? And there was a lot of conversation. Are we,
There's a lot of conversation on last month's video. That administration was gonna take a lot of the suggestions that, for
on
them to
this
bring us
one,
back.
on this specific policy, right?
On this specific policy,
Okay,
about a
and
40
so we did
45
bring it
minute
back, but it's
conversation.
not.
For last month's meeting, that conversation had to do with the various steps, and administration was to take all that information that we had shared, some of the suggestions that we shared, and bring us back a recommendation. So that's still where we're at.
And so where we're at is to possibly put it on JGD.
Right, instead of having JGR, I think
But
we
not
made it.
have.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that the decision to bring R1 into the discussion, because I was so that we could edit R1 and then place it into JGD.
Right.
So that we knew exactly what policy we were and were not editing, because otherwise it would look like we're adding a whole bunch of things to JGD, when in fact,
Which is what
we're
happened.
doing, which is in fact what we're doing is actually just moving it to what back to what core policy is.
Yes, and we did look at JGD R1, and we did make adjustments to that
Yeah.
based upon our discussion, so, just, okay, got it, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Did we vote on that?
No.
Okay.
A motion and a second.
All
To
right.
move it to August.
We had a motion and a second.
All right, is there any other discussion? All right, all in favor of moving JGD and JGD R1 to the August meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, those get moved. All right, so I believe that the next three should be relatively easy because we've had discussions on all of those before. So let's go to JHDF, Suicide Awareness and Prevention. Is there any discussion or a motion?
I have a discussion / question, I suppose.
And we have people in the audience for any questions.
Huh?
Oh.
We have people in the audience.
Oh, good. Okay,
They
on
reviewed it thoroughly.
page 4, which is no proposed changes, under response to incidences impacting the school. I'm thinking that this just didn't get picked up, so I don't know which one it is, but in the second paragraph, it says, the CRT and the superintendent or designee will determine, and I don't know if that is because we don't have a CRT, we have a BCRT and a DCRT, so I don't know if it is the building or the district. The paragraph prior, in the second sentence, it says, will confer with the district level CRT. So I don't know if the second paragraph.
Would one of our experts come on?
Yeah.
Come on up. We'll come and sit at the table so that you can be on camera and say who you are, and we can have the discussion.
Yeah,
We'll have to be together because I did.
Yeah, we have two open chairs over here. Just make sure to state your name so that on the recording gets it.
Lee Spence, Director of Secondary School Counseling.
And Susan Perkins, Director of Elementary School Counseling.
Okay.
And good catch. We would say DRT, District Response Team.
That's what I thought.
So there should be a D in front of the CRT then, right?
right, yes.
Yeah.
DCRT, yeah.
Well, the paragraph before says district level CRT.
Which I think
I'm
is
not sure what we
fine.
had in the, oh,
The-
you do have that in the definitions, the DCRT.
Yeah.
DC.
Right.
Yeah. I think just when they were updating all the
Yes.
different ones, that one just got missed.
Good eye.
Which there was a whole bunch of them, so.
April, was that the only thing?
That was the only thing I saw.
I have I guess this is also more of a question, it doesn't necessarily, the return to school following a suicide attempt. This obviously can only apply if the school is aware that the child attempted suicide or attempted self-harm, which is not always going to be the case, depending on when it happened or how the family dealt with it. Do we need to have anything that indicates that in the policy, or that indicates like when the district is notified by parents the following happens? I don't wanna open us up. I think the school has a responsibility, generally, to be, like, to know where our students are and for safety and things like that, which is, part of why AUP at Rockbridge might be problematic, but that's a different discussion, policy. But there is also a limit if the school is not aware, and so wanna make sure that we are covered if something happens, but parents never made the school aware that there was an issue.
Could we add the word known in the title, return to school following a known suicide attempt?
Requires support when returning.
I think she was in the.
In the
heading.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean,
that-
I would feel more comfortable with
I think
that.
that
I
makes
think
sense.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're adding the word known
In
to.
the
in the
title.
title.
Okay, perfect, okay.
Which is not to say that like, if people don't become aware, and that,
Right.
that
Known
also, I
to
will.
who? I mean, I know a lot of things.
Well, I think it has to be reported to someone in the building, right?
And we have wording on page 2 that I kind of like, that we might be able to put in there somewhere. Towards the bottom where it says students who may be having a suicide crisis, after the first number 2, it says when a BCRT member receives notification that a student is believed to be having a suicide crisis. Could we make some sort of line there, when a BCRT member receives notification that a student has attempted suicide?
Yeah, maybe instead of just saying following a known attempt.
Right,
Attempt,
instead of
like-
saying following a known attempt, because
Yeah.
that specifies who it's known to, because there may be many people in a building who know it.
Yeah.
But do we want to restrict it to the BCRT or anyone? Because if I'm a teacher and I'm not on BCRT and I know of this, I should be reporting it, and I should report it to
Right.
any of the.
Yeah.
Right.
So, return to school following a known suicide attempt.
Grant?
I think if you wanted to include language there, you certainly could. I would also say that on page 2, it talks a lot about reasonable belief of risk of suicide and suicide crisis, and what obligations employees have when they have that reasonable belief, including pulling in the response team. I would think that that would apply to the entire policy moving forward from there. So it may already be kind of baked into the first
Right.
and second pages. I think if you wanted to be clearer, I think you certainly could add some additional language on that 4th page, but I don't know if it's necessary from a legal perspective. It's more just clarity and ease of use. So if you would, I might maybe pull some of that language from the second page over, but.
I mean, I guess I'm just also looking at like where the first step is meet with the student and family upon the return. There's sort of an implication there, like the first step actually, there has to be some sort of notification from the family for that to happen. So I guess that was more what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I see
like-
what you're saying,
like,
how can we
has-
have the meeting if we don't know about it?
Right.
Like, is there, and like how, and if the family isn't the one that notified them, right? Like, where does that leave the family? Like, I would hope that we are not in a situation where someone from the school is reaching out to say like, hey, we need to have a meeting about your child's
Right.
safety when they return to school because they just, I mean, like,
Right,
you would
right.
Yeah.
assume that they have knowledge, but it just
Right.
feels, and I realize that it can get messy,
Sure.
but just like trying to make sure that like
Could it
it
even-
covers all the proper steps.
I like the sentence in here, right after students who may be having suicide crisis, it says, if an employee reasonably believes that a student is having a suicide crisis, it says the employee will take the following steps. So I think that sort of covers, you know, no matter who it is, any employee could be, as long as, you know.
But this is about once they return.
Yeah.
This is not about like, I think you're in crisis. This is what's happening when someone comes back to the building.
So
Could
if
it
you're
be when a student has attempted suicide, this is the policy? That the parent or guardian would notify, and we're notified
how
by
do-
parent or guardian? Because we're not gonna go through this process without family involvement, obviously.
Right.
I totally get what you're saying. We just need to make sure that they're not assuming that we're picking up on information that a family hasn't shared with us
Yeah.
or that a
Right.
student hasn't shared.
Correct.
So is it something as simple as, on that second sentence there, where it says a member of the BCRT will, should it say when the BCRT has been made aware of a suicide attempt, comma, a member of the BCRT will?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or the other thing I was thinking was just at that first step, number 1 under there, upon notification by the family, meet with the student and family upon return.
But do we want to limit that to notification by the family, because it could be notification by other parties?
It could be notification by other parties.
It could
I have
be.
made that notification before, so.
Yes,
To the
but
families.
we would still want.
You would still want to have the conversation.
Guardian and
Right,
family would be
absolutely.
involved in
So
this
then
meeting.
Paul-
That's why I
Paul's one.
purposefully, normally I don't like things passive, but that's why I purposefully made it
Yeah.
passive, so that it's upon notification, these three steps will be taken.
Right.
So can you read the sentence again for me?
Okay, so when the BCRT has been made aware of a suicide attempt, comma, lowercase a, member of the BCRT will, for that second sentence.
And are admins, like principals and assistant principals, automatically part of the BCRT?
They should be. That's the, yeah.
I just can
Outreach
think, like,
counselor,
I can
counselor.
think of at least one situation very recently that I am aware of where a assistant principal knew about some, I realize this is not in policy yet, nobody broke policy, but like was made aware of a situation with a person coming back and nothing, like no additional steps were taken to check on the student. So I just wanted to, that was my question of like, if it's that the BCRT has to be made aware, are we assuming that the upper level admin are part of that, or is there a way, or that they have an obligation to inform the
I would
the
find that
BCRT?
highly unusual, that situation that you just described. I think this is a training issue, right? So
Right,
once
yeah.
this is complete, we would just want to make sure that everyone
It's
who
very
is a
clear.
member of the crisis response
Right.
team knows what their responsibility
Right.
is. If you're a receiver of information,
Right,
what do you
this
do
is,
with it?
this is what you do.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you're not a member of the crisis
Yes.
response team, if you receive this information, who do you
100%.
go to in your building and make sure it's
Yes.
clearly laid out for everyone?
Right,
Yes.
because the members include administrators, counselors, and may also include school nurse, school social workers. And the thing is, when you're talking about Rockbridge, Battle, or Hickman, you have 7 administrators, right? Not all 7 of them might be on the BCRT.
Right, but I would assume or hope that if an administrator that is
Yes.
not on that team
Yes, you would-
is informed,
right.
that just like they would be in theory covered just like other staff, right? They are
Right.
so responsible for reporting it
Yes.
to them.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Any other discussion? All right, if you don't mind, I can make the motion.
Make the motion for both?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so I move to adopt JHFD as recommended with the following 2 changes. JHFD, sorry. With the following.
DF.
DF.
You
Oh,
said
I
it
wrote
wrong
DF.
twice.
Okay. I move to adopt JHDF as recommended with the following 2 changes. Under response to incidents impacting the school, in the second paragraph, add a D in front of CRT. And under return to school following a suicide attempt, in the second sentence of the first paragraph, add the words, when the BCRT has been made aware of a suicide attempt, comma, lowercase a, remove the uppercase a, member of the BCRT will.
Second, I do have a question, though, sorry, I know you
Okay.
didn't have, which is just, and potentially for a friendly amendment to the thing, are we recommending this for first read or for approval or for what is the recommendation? How does it feel? Like how much have we changed or added?
Well, yeah, you've been on
I know.
you've been on leadership before. That's usually their decision, but we do add a recommendation sometimes. Would you feel more comfortable if we added this for first first read?
I mean, it feels to me like it's mostly just clarified information that is there, like the things that are, with the exception, like there's a couple pieces, but they're in some ways more procedural, but just to ensure that they're followed. Like, I don't have an issue with it being on consent agenda, I just don't know.
I have to agree with you. I mean, the spirit of the policy hasn't changed that drastically. We've just had a few, semantic things. So I'm with you on that.
And it's primarily spearheaded from MSBA with some new laws taking place. And it's a policy that I believe has to be reviewed every 3 years according to either state or federal law.
And yeah, essentially our biggest change here is just moving it from the district level to the building level because we are so big.
Right.
And MSBA, of course, has policies that work for everybody a lot of the time. And
Nope.
it just doesn't work for us to have, 30-some buildings and not have BCRDs.
Yeah.
Right.
So, do you?
But,
is-
yeah, that's fine,
okay,
I'm
okay.
fine with all of it.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Next, we go to JO-1 student records. And remind me, is this one that we have not, this one is one we have not discussed because we haven't gotten to it, is that correct?
That's correct, yes, all right.
Okay.
And my one thing has to do, this is MSBA updates, I think. Is that correct, mostly?
I believe it is.
Yes, it is.
Oh, I mean,
This is the directory information one
Yes.
predominantly, that essentially removing place of birth and I think making a few other things more explicit.
I have a question for Grant, which is not on part that has necessarily changed, but just generally, it's to this, but also more generally. So for example, on page 3 at the bottom, under military and higher education access, right? The second sentence, however, if a parent or secondary school student who is at least 18 submits a written request, the district will not release the information without first obtaining written consent from the parent or the student. Does the opt-out on the electronic registration satisfy the requirement for written consent? Or written, request to remove them from the list?
Because it's in the electronic opt-outs that we send out to parents at the beginning,
Right,
is that
it's
sufficient?
not like it's not a specific written request, take me off this list, it's you're on this, but you can choose to opt out, and parents click that opt out. Is that legally, that obligates us, right,
I've not looked into that issue specifically, but I would imagine it would, yes.
okay,
I would think it would too.
Yeah.
okay. I just have kids at that age that I'm getting calls from recruiters, and
Oh, I did too.
I couldn't remember, quite honestly, if we had opted out or not, and there is no way to go back and look at your current year registration
Nope,
in the
there's not.
system, which is a different issue again. But I was just curious, just for, so.
Any other discussions, questions, or motion?
I don't think I had anything on this one. I have
Okay.
one thing on JO. I have one on the next one.
Okay.
Okay.
It's very minor.
All right, so does somebody want to make a motion?
I move that we adopt policy JO1 student records as presented for presentation to the July board meeting.
Second?
August, or
No, oh yeah, there's a meeting in July.
July.
Yeah, and I know there is, we just had them all going towards August. Okay, I'll put July.
No, this is the July,
The other one
Board
that's
meeting.
going for
Policy.
Right, I
approval
get
is
it.
also for July, correct? The previous one we did for approval, that should be for July
For
as well.
July as well,
not
yes.
August.
JBE, JHD.
Yeah, we didn't specify, so usually it goes to the next meeting.
To the
Okay.
next
Yeah,
meeting,
that's
Just July, yeah.
to avoid.
The only August is the revision of policies, those are in August,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
board meeting is in July.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All in favor of passing JO-1 student records as recommended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. All right, April, you said you
Yeah,
had
so-
JOAP1.
JOAP1, the reason why we have this one in front of us is when we were given JO1, it references JOAP1, so I went out and compared it. And I had recommended that the changes you see in green on 9 and 10 be added. So administration did that. I need to also find, because I just,
It's on page 1 under directory information.
thank you. Page 1, under directory information, we should reference, and I know why it's written this way, but we should reference the school district defines directory information in policy JO-1, because we have -1.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's the change that's needed.
Directory information in,
Where is that? Directory information?
It's under definitions, under the page 1 of JO-AP1. It just says policy JO when we have adopted JO-1.
Right.
So it just should say JO-1 instead of JO.
Yeah,
not JOAP.
No, this is
'cause
AP1.
it's supposed
Oh,
to
yeah, yeah,
cross-reference
yeah,
this.
yeah,
this
got
policy.
it, got it,
Yep.
okay.
we
got
just
it.
need to reference
Yeah,
because
Yeah.
MSBA has some policies and stuff that are broken down because of urban and rural districts. And so when MSBA writes it, they'll just put the letters. But then if it's one of those policies that's, one for urban and one for rural, it'll have a 1 or a 2. And we should just reference what the actual nomenclature is that we have.
Right.
So my motion would be to adopt policy JOAP1.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Yes.
I just had a quick thing.
Yep.
For consistency, I wonder if we, didn't also need to add parent/guardians language throughout, because we do have it in other policies. I just noticed that was missing, very minor, but, well, I don't know if it's
Release of
minor, but,
education records.
She's right.
yeah, in our other policies, we say parent/guardian, and guardian is referenced in the
Right, yeah.
beginning, but it doesn't,
Doesn't follow through.
Yeah,
follow
under the
through.
word parent, it defines parent as a biological or adoptive parent of a student, a guardian of a student. So,
Okay,
Or
so
an
so it already
individual
defines,
acting
In
as a
this-
parent or
parent
guardian.
is defined as a guardian
yeah, parent is defined as a guardian
for
Yes.
purposes of this.
for this policy. I
Yep.
understand what you're saying.
yeah, it seemed odd, because that's, in our other policies, we say parent/guardian.
And policy JO1 actually uses the same definition. So,
In JO1, do they,
so JO1 does not have the parent/guardian like we have in a lot of our other.
Oh, okay, yep.
Okay.
So they're consistent with one another.
okay.
I don't feel strongly, I guess for consistency.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
I would say the fact that it's defined that way,
Yeah.
I think covers it, although that doesn't mean that someone couldn't go back and change it. Because this is pretty much with student records, so much of it is about information going to parents or guardians. It feels like it is a little more cumbersome maybe to go back and try to find each
All the
instance. where it's in there, and the potential to miss one seems much higher.
And it's consistent currently with the way MSBA has it presented. Or I would have been going through and marking all of that as well.
Okay,
Okay, that was it.
all right. So go ahead, April, make the
Make the
motion you're
motion.
about to.
I move that we adopt JOAP 1 with the amendment on page 1 under directory information, adding -1 after the letters JO at the end of that sentence.
Okay,
Second.
all right. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And now, the last one of tonight is KK. We've had some discussion on KK. We've gone back and forth on it. This was originally recommended by administration, I believe because of the marijuana issue. And several people on the committee had issues with the reference to FERPA. And so the recommendation of at least me, who drafted this, is to conform that paragraph to what is in MSBA core, remove the reference to FERPA and say, unless the building principal has approved the visit in advance after consulting with the teacher. So is there any discussion or comments, questions about KK? This has been on the agenda for a while, so. All right, hearing none, do we have a motion?
Just highlight one thing, sorry.
Okay.
It depends a little bit on, there may be a need to consult the union with respect to change in working conditions.
Okay.
For the change in, to the extent that there's changes in classroom visits and kind of observations that may implicate, may not, it sort of is an open question. So I don't know if that's been something that has occurred, or if those discussions have occurred, or that thought there, so I just raise that as a possibility, not that it changes necessarily what you all would approach, but that's something for the policy and then also the board and the district.
So this is having to do with, what you're saying is, under classroom observations, that we might need to consult with the union
Potentially.
first about changes to this paragraph?
If the district is moving from no classroom observations to potentially classroom observations,
I don't, okay.
if that's the interpretation, then that may involve discussion with the union in terms of changing working condition. I'm not saying necessarily that's true, it may be something that you want to discuss.
So the policy was adopted in, or it was last revised in 2020. And that does allow for classroom, it does, I mean, this thing says that, okay, no, it doesn't, okay, yes, you're right. So in 2020, it prohibited, does not permit parents and guardians or others to visit classrooms during instructional time for the purposes of observing students under any case.
So that was cool. I think that may have a lot to do with COVID during that time frame, 2020.
It very well, I mean, that could have been, that was
Do we
June
have a
of
record of what it was prior to
22.
2020?
I can find out.
But this change, which is a significant change from that policy to allowing none, to saying unless the building principal has approved, and I think that's a good,
And there's consultation
And
of the teacher.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, the building principal by policy can't approve it without the teacher being aware and like,
I hear you.
I'm saying, I'm just.
And there are Title I statutes that say that one of the ways to have parental involvement is classroom observation within the federal education acts also. So I see what you're saying, and maybe we do need to consult, but also it's already sort of baked into at least Title I, that is a potential, not a requirement, not a guarantee, but a potential way that parents can interact.
What I can tell you is prior to 2020, in 2018, it was, the principal would check with the teacher and come to an agreement. They,
So this is essentially going back.
Correct.
We're reverting back to what it was prior to
presentation
COVID.
question. Parent and, okay, in the purposes of Missouri, what was the original? They used to do things a little bit differently. It says MSBA has revised this policy specifically to address situations mediate family disputes, modify the policy in response to district concerns, counselors, policy,
Can I
medical
ask a
marijuana, so
Different
that's not.
question while you're
Yeah.
searching. With the marijuana stuff, do we have to say marijuana or marijuana products?
Where's that one?
To capture which,
So for example, an edible is that just considered marijuana?
yes.
Okay. I think that's not how, if that is what is covered legally, then that's great.
I would say any product that has marijuana in it would fall underneath this
Okay.
prohibition. But if you wanted to prohibit paraphernalia, that might be a slightly different concept, but that would probably not fall under state law.
Actual, right, okay.
Different.
And we did modify a number of other policies related to marijuana use and paraphernalia and all of that. This was one of the holdovers,
Right.
because of the paragraph above. Yeah.
I can't find it, it looks like that entire section was added in 2020. And prior to that, it was in 2017, and I don't see that it's letting me go back that far.
So, again, if you're going from no visits to visits under the principal, I think this is a substantive change for teachers, and we probably need to have consultation with our union to let them know, at least give them an opportunity to weigh in on this.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
That seems very reasonable.
Yeah, so what is
I
We have-
would say then if it's the will of the committee to pass it out with, to consult with, the union or any other entity that administration feels like they need to before taking it to the board.
okay, so maybe bring back in August, maybe?
Sure.
I mean, I know that,
Sure, we can do it that way too, yeah.
I mean, that's what we need to do, it sounds like.
Yeah, we bring back in August, and then if the
Sure.
policy committee is ready, that way you all know what the union is saying, and I don't
Right,
mind
right,
having
right,
that
right,
conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is the meeting in August?
Oh,
The last Monday in August.
Last Monday.
I forget the date.
26th.
August 26th.
I was going to mention that.
It is the last Monday.
Yep. Okay, so then I move KK to the August agenda, so that administration can discuss this matter with the teacher union and any other party they feel like they need to in order to, determine whether this is appropriate.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
So next meeting, last Monday in August will be the next full meeting. We are going to be discussing committees hopefully on Thursday. And part of that will be determining how we're gonna be handling our community members. And most likely, we will have everybody apply again and have a meeting, just a very brief meeting at the beginning of August, just to appoint our community members again, so that we can have the full meeting in August. But I don't know the details of that until after Thursday, so I just want everybody to be aware of that. Of course, community members won't be voting on community members, so we're good. And certainly, we've had great community members, and I hope that both Ms. Alexander and Ms. Dormier Williams are perfectly willing to continue because they've done a great job. Doctor, excuse me. Yes.
Do we know, and maybe this is after we have
It's hard earned, you deserve it.
committee appointments and stuff, but do we know, or when will we know what the meeting schedule is for next year? I mean, I know I sent you some recommended dates and I cross-referenced them with like 4 different religions and whether or not we were in school.
I think.
I did.
Did I send that list? I sent a list on to you.
And I'm just putting it on the calendar right
Yeah.
now.
So I think we've already sent that list on, confirmed.
To somebody.
Confirmed those. I think I sent it to Meredith.
Okay. I also wanted to thank our community members and everyone else serving on the committee because you have done the work of 10 policy committees.
So what was the final count, April,
The final count.
for the year?
The final count is,
There was more done in a couple meetings I was at. Year I was on policy.
as of this moment today, we have reviewed, revised, recreated, otherwise touched 79 policies since September, and that does not include the 4 that we are recommending to go to the board in July. That is amazing. We have over
Yeah, it
300
is.
policies, and
It is, yeah.
thank you, everyone who
But thank you for,
worked on all of
Thank,
that.
thank you for keeping us organized.
Right,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
And the late night conversations when
Late night conversations, I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right, so is there any motion today?
I move that I guess we, adjourn and don't see each other until August.
All right,
Well, some of us.
all in favor?
To not have to see me until August.
Any opposed?
Wait.
All right, we're adjourned.